Thanks for the introduction. Yes, my name is Chris Cataldi, and I'll be speaking about games in 2020, a very exciting title. I hope the presentation will be meeting that expectation, and I'm going to go quickly through it. My company's name is Genvid. Genvid comes from two Latin roots, gen meaning birth, vid viewing. Esports, we think, is the beginning of a really interesting time in games, and I'll be talking you through why we think that. A little bit about my agenda today. I'll start off with a little bit of my bias, why I think the things I do, why now is the right time to be thinking about this, describing a little bit about what we call Experience 3.0, and then why esports is the first step towards that. By the way, I'm from New York. New Yorkers speak very quickly. How am I doing on speed so far? You guys good? Okay, great. It's post-lunch. Ooh, it's post-lunch, so keep it fresh. So I spent 11 years in Japan. Towards the end of my time there, I worked for a company called Square Enix. You might have heard of it. I ran a business called Shinra Technologies, which was Square Enix's cloud gaming platform. You've heard of Shinra. You might not have heard of Shinra Technologies. We were doing cool things there. You've probably not heard of me, but you should listen to me because I have a corgi and therefore I have good taste and I can read trends. What we were doing at Shinra was cloud gaming. Whenever I talk about cloud gaming, I often get asked, is it like Gaikai or OnLive or any of those companies that took games that could run locally, put it on a server, encoded them and streamed them to devices? The answer to that is no. It's completely different. Cloud gaming, in its essence, is taking a game that can only run on the cloud. That means process render is designed to be run on a server and stream that out to ubiquitous devices. And the reason you do that is you can really power brand new experiences that don't exist today. So I liken it to, imagine if you had a local multiplayer experience, right? You could fit 1,000 people into a room, all playing the same game. But instead of it being an Xbox or even the most souped up computer you can think of, imagine it's a supercomputer. Right? What kind of new experiences could you, as a game developer, enable through that? And what kind of ways can you interact with that? Give you a little bit of example of what that means. This is an example of a demo we announced at GDC many years ago called the Dragon Demo. This is a huge map, 17 times the map size of Skyrim. In it, we populated with over 16,000 AI, all synchronized. There's no streaming from memory. We had real-time terrain deformation. None of this is, by the way, pre-rendered. This is all rendered in real time. When we brought up height maps, they had real physics consequences in the world. Again, there's no synchronization because it's one instance, one simulation. And so every player was a viewport, a render viewport into that one simulation. And you could do all kinds of crazy things like fly around it, Mach 1, and you could have real-time water physics that's being done, simulated on the particle level. So all kinds of crazy things. None of this is scripted. None of this is it's all pretty much emergent. And when you take things like real-time terrain deformation, crazy AI, and you put it together, you have emergent behavior that's not only interesting to play, but interesting to watch. And the only difference between a player and a viewer when you're talking about cloud gaming is latency, and actually real-time cost of bandwidth, but that's getting into the business side of it. So from the very beginning at Shinra, we were starting to think about, well, if we're making these really cool new kinds of content that are interesting to watch, how do we kind of empower our viewers to also interact with it? So we were making all these games that had a very core player dynamic to it, but also an interesting viewer dynamic. A viewer, up until now, when you're watching a game, you have no input into the game you're watching. You're literally passively consuming that information. We're in a connected world now where viewers could input into it if you create the right platform for it. So with that, so that makes you really reconsider how people interact with games. And today we are here. You've got a game, you've got a player, maybe you have a player who's watching locally, and as you put that out to streaming or esports, which is the first kind of instance of that, you have people who are fans of the game who are watching the game. They may be players, and you have people who are fans of the personality of the influencer, or the player who are watching that. Experience economy, you guys have read the news, right? We're about to, the robots are going to take over. They're going to take our jobs. They're going to be sitting very much like Wall-E in our seats, getting pre-processed food, and we need things to consume. And games are going to be what they are, right? Because games are the biggest entertainment in terms of revenue ever. They're huge, and they're only going to get bigger. We're seeing, and by the way, what I'm talking about here isn't just me ranting, although it is me ranting. What we do at Genvid is we speak to game publishers, Hollywood, the brands, you name it, the people who are creating this content and monetizing this content. And what we're seeing from all of those places is a kind of focus on not only owning the content, but owning the customer experience. And the customer is transitioning from not just the player, but also the viewer. And it's not just a player who's viewing. It might be a viewer who used to play, or it might be a viewer who's never played. And if you think of sports, which is in many ways apocryphal to what esports is, there are some interesting parallels if you think about it. So we're seeing a convergence of games, web, and spectating. That web, you can say connectivity, spectating coming and creating a very new kind of experience. That will be, I think, self-evident in a second. So games, I'm going to talk a little bit about the evolution of the game industry because it makes a lot of sense. We all have heard of arcades, even if we all haven't played in arcades. The older amongst us have actually played in arcades and watched people watch the spectacle there. We had coin ops. I'm going to intersplice the growth of the game industry with these steps. Game arcades are still a thing some places, not all places. In Japan, it's still a major thing. In America, you have amusement as well. It's still a multi-million-dollar business. You just don't really see it as much, but location-based is a big thing you hear with VR. But what's interesting about the arcade is spectators and players coexist, right? You have people who go to play, and you have people who go to watch. Not everyone wants to play the game in front of other people, but everyone likes watching the game in some way or shape or form, right? There's no strong tie between skill in the game and attending an arcade. All you need is interest. The barrier entry to go to an arcade is low. If the arcade is rightly designed, they monetize you even if you're not good at the game, right? It's an amusement park. You go there, you buy things, you enjoy your experience there, and the game arcade wants you to play the game, but as long as there's a minimum amount of people playing the game who are creating an atmosphere to go, everyone goes and has a good time. As we went from arcades to console, everyone kind of took their game experience home. Now you had to buy a console, right? So what happened is spectacle of going to an arcade kind of died down. The arcades kind of died. And the only way you experienced the game was buying the console or going to a friend's house who had, and I grew up in that age where you went to the friend's house who had Final Fantasy VII and you watched him play the entire game because I was really bad at Final Fantasy VII, and I enjoyed that. The problem is the publisher, the game developer, doesn't make money from the person who's just a fan of the game, and so they're not creating any kind of experience for that person, right, beyond the coolness of how it looks, right? They're trying to convert you into a player. If they convert you into a player, then you're monetized. I'll skip over a guy named Ray Baer, but if you haven't heard of Ralph Baer, you should definitely look him up. He's the guy who created, anyone know who he is? Yeah, the brown box, right? He's the guy who pretty much created Pong. And what did he do? He took a device that was meant for consumption of passive TV, pretty much, and put an overlay on top of it, and pretty much created Pong. I'll show this because it's kind of cool. So it was licensed by Magnavox to make Odyssey. Literally, you have a non-interactive overlay over these pretty much two light sticks that just move around. Why that's hockey, I don't know, but it's pretty much Pong in many different levels. And this was kind of the birth of games as we see it, right? You take something that was meant to be view, you make it interactive, and now people have another way to interact with their screen. He didn't really make a lot of money off that because arcades came and took it. But anyway, consoles were huge, and consoles really grew the game industry until something came, which was network consoles, right? And what we're seeing here is in a way, as gamers self-identified from, in the beginning, coin op, there is no such thing as a gamer, right? Everyone is a person. They go to a game arcade, they find out if they like games or not, because they didn't exist until then. Gamers then bring the console home. They play those games. And network multiplayer, even, you get more core as the higher up you go there. But the more you go there, you really generate more and more revenue from the same people, right? Because you're distributed everywhere, and the people who are playing the games are paying more money into it. So again, huge influence, right? Last but not least, games go on for everyone, right? So 2007, you've got smartphone come out, you've got games that are made for that screen, and you've got the idea that there's no such thing as a core gamer or a casual gamer, although we call themselves that. Everyone's a gamer in some way, shape, or form. So create game content around that and monetize it and design it in a way that people want to play it. So that's games. Web has a similar strata. You have communication in the beginning, very much slow, broadband, no broadband, SAML, right? Then you go information-based, you go to a curated thing, you have people who are creating that information. Social, you have user-generated content, you're looking to both generate and go through that. And then right now we have the streaming, a lot of people are watching everything, right? Netflix makes money, you know that. What is coming? Low latency streaming is coming. Low latency, everything is coming. Cheap server-side rendering is coming. If you've ever looked at, probably you haven't, but if you've looked at the economics of a cloud gaming platform, you would see that everyone thinks that the main problem is render power and it's really real-time cost of bandwidth, but it's latency to end user, right? And depending on what you're living in and how old your router is, you have massive variance in end user experience. With 5G and coming to 2020, you'll see a lot of changes in that, and I'm going to talk a little bit about what that means. So how many of you looked into the specs of what 5G means? It's a buzzword, we hear about it a lot. Oh, 2018, 2020, great, 4G, 5G. Again, we're still in early testing in America and other places, but it's at least 10 times faster than LTE or 4G, if not many times faster. And if you're thinking about downloads, you can download the entire, you can download crazy things crazy quickly. But it's not the speed, right? It's latency. And again, these are theoretical. Probably it's going to be more like 10 milliseconds, not 1 millisecond, because you have interference. But if you think of massive downloads that are happening very, very quickly, you can start thinking about offloading parts of the render, parts of the compute from local to server, and it's not as crazy, right? A lot of people don't think about the cords, cables as a really big innovation, right? But if you think about a screen, right? The screen is only as powerful as what you can put into it. But if you have an HDMI 3 port, you can now take what would up until now be in that screen, process it somewhere else, and you have very fast throughput that changes what you can consume in that screen. So spectating, we all like spectating. We're all spectators, right? If you've ever been in a traffic accident, you see people going by, everyone rubbernecks, everyone looks at everyone else. We like spectacle, even though sometimes we don't like admitting it. This is one of the oldest things in the world, and it's been used for good and for bad. And now we have sports, which is kind of the same thing. Reality TV, which is, I think up until now, one of the best examples of how you can take a property, make it so that people watching it are emotionally and in many ways monetarily invested in it, they'll keep watching it. Again, Britain is, you guys have been doing this for ages. And the idea is what happens when you have streaming involved? What does that do for games? So everyone likes bringing up Twitch Plays Pokemon. Twitch Plays Pokemon is good because it shows that people will watch a game. It's bad because it's a game that wasn't designed to be watched. And so it's very difficult to replicate, virality of it. So I'm going to talk a little bit about Experience 3.0, which we're here. So if Experience 1.0 is local, taking a game, whether it's local multiplayer, single player, an arcade game, and Experience 2.0 is playing that same game in various different places on the same device. Experience 3.0 is the idea of ubiquity of distribution, but also having access to limitless processing power, and anyone can interact in any way. And what does that do for games? What does that do for how we consume and interact with content? In essence, it's the idea that you can play anywhere. Now, if you can play anywhere and anyone can play, the question is, how do we play? And we all have different tastes. And up until now, we've been very much categorized by, you play this kind of game, therefore you will play that game, right? But if you look at how more traditional content is, music isn't you listen to music that you're good at playing, right? You listen to music you like, right? And how kind of deep dive you do really depends on how much you love that music. You listen to top 40, or you learn how to play it, or you learn how to sing it, etc. Right? Games will become like this as well, because we'll have multiple levels of meaningful engagement that everyone will be doing, and it'll kind of create these huge events. And I'm going to stop talking for a second and kind of show you. So how many of you are avid esports viewers today? Okay, great. How many of you watch on Twitch those? Okay. How many of you watch that same esport in engine? Okay. Where do we think the best esports viewing or consuming method is? Okay. I would say, all things being equal, it would be in engine, but it's also the hardest to get into, right? If you're watching Counter-Strike in engine and GoTV, you get access to all the camera angles, you can follow the players you like, you can see replays, all of that real time. But it's also the highest barrier to entry, right? And it's also very difficult to put it in the commentary and listen to it and watch it at the same time. What we're going to be seeing in very near term is the ability for you to watch a game and actually interact with the game that you're watching on a platform of your choice. So what we're seeing here is a demo I've been showing for a long time because the actual projects we're working on I can't show because they're under NDA. But this is Unreal Tournament that we're streaming live to YouTube. And I'll show if I can. You'll see YouTube live. And what viewers can do is they can actually interact with the game that they're watching. So I've just clicked on that player, I get all the information about that player, and each viewer is able to do that. Click on a player, they can do things like cheer for a player. So we just change camera angles. So with Genghis, I'll cheer for Genghis. Again, this game is not running on my PC, I'm just streaming it from YouTube. And if my device can render and decode Unreal YouTube, I can watch it and I can interact with it. Esports, again, this is just watching and enjoying the co-creation of spectacle. But what about games that were built for the ground up for interactions from viewers? What if a viewer could, press a button and kill a player? That would be really weird, right? You wouldn't want to do that for an esport, but there's no reason you'd have to make an esport. You could make a game that was meant to be played and meant to be watched and meant to be interacted with. And so literally that's what I'm doing. I'll press a button. This is a live game, by the way. It's bots, so I'm not pissing off people at Epic. I'll press a kill button and all the players will die. I can watch any camera angle I want. What you're seeing, again, these are cloud deployed spectator modes that are connected to the same multiplayer session, so I can watch whatever there. You'll see that Pepsi ad. That Pepsi ad is localized to me, but it is juxtaposed against the video behind it at a specific angle. You can start doing things that you did with Web 2.0, right? You can have user specific content. Again, that's not there, I can turn it off. And we can do the same thing for just about any kind of game because literally what we do is we connect to the multiplayer session and show it. So with people watching games more than ever before, I can tell you for a fact that game publishers are seeing game viewing as not just promotion, not just a way to keep people coming back, but bringing people in and not necessarily converting them into players. And so I have a whole bunch of projects from Hollywood to major publishers that are making spectator modes for viewing. If you think about the history of spectator mode, it wasn't built to be broadcast, right? It was built to keep you in engine so that when you died early in a Counter-Strike match, you didn't just log off and then break the matchmaking, right? It meant to keep you in there. So if you repurpose it, you can do all kinds of cool stuff. So broadcasts are crazy because you can, up until now you've been thinking of players, now you can think about viewers, and it becomes not only viewers can actually be a completely new demographic that you're marketing your game to, not just as a player. I've got a couple minutes left. Am I over? I got 1 minute. I'm almost done. Everyone likes spectating. We should be thinking about UI. We should be thinking about camera angles from what spectators should be seeing and not what players should be seeing. Think about real sports. We don't necessarily want to be watching it over the shoulder because that's very confusing. It's growing. And if you start thinking about the ecosystem as not akin to broadcast or akin to real sports, but as a part of the game ecosystem, and you make it interactive, which is what game developers are really good at, creating interactive content, then you can do all kinds of cool stuff. Everyone will no longer have this bifurcation between a player and a viewer. You're going to have all different kinds of strata, and what that means is you can have many different kinds of layers of interaction. It's no longer buying a skin that a player has. It can be buying something for a player. It can be dropping an NPC in the middle of the map, things that are no longer scripted, right? It's very emergent and keeps players coming back and keeps viewers coming back. And there are all different kinds of markets you can bring it to. So I'll stop there because I can go on forever. And I'll take a question if you have it. And if not, I'm around afterwards. And thank you for your time.